So Wedding Epindel has been out in starsavior for a couple of days now, and I finally got a little bit more of time to myself to try it out in the highest level of RTA. Hey guys, MrPokke here. So for today's content, we're going to be taking a look at how Wedding Epindel is going to be performing and whether or not you should be pulling for her in your own starsavior account. Going by her kid, she'll be going for her dupes, her arcana, build paths, drafting, and other tips and tricks. So without further ado, let's get into today's content. So in summary for Wedding Epindel, she is pretty much going to be the caster nuke equivalent against an enemy shield unit where she's gonna be having the highest amount of utility, notably from her S2 into S3 combination, where you're gonna be able to not just give yourself an extra turn, but also a 30% action gauge with your ally on the highest attack, as well as a self-attack out from the skill 2. So if you're gonna be able to trigger the S2 into S3, especially with the S2's additional 150% damage multiplier, you are gonna be able to do a significant amount of damage to the enemy target. So generally speaking, the best utility if you're going to be using Wedding Epindel is definitely going to be going up against any kind of defenders or things that will give the enemy barriers, which Wedding Epindel is going to be able to do an absolutely insane amount of damage, notably against Emily, Heidi, Hilde, and even Wedding Carmen. So jumping straight into the kit, first of which being her passive, where you are able to increase your attack by 15% because of your additional dupe. But the most important thing is this particular second line where you can gain yourself 1 stack of ignition when an ally triggers a critical hit, as well as 2 stacks of ignition at 100% chance with a start of a sun attribute ally. So this is gonna be essentially the most important part of Wedding Epindel synergy, because if you are able to get yourself 5 stacks of ignition, you can pretty much get this S2's extra turn, which can only trigger the extra turn if you do have yourself 5 stacks. If you do not have 5 stacks on Wedding Epindel, then you pretty much want to always open up with your S3, right? So that's gonna be the passive. Whether or not you should be pulling for her dupes, I'll talk a little bit more towards the end, but I would say if you're gonna be using her in PvP, I would highly recommend those dupes just to get the 100% chance of ignition proc stacking. The basic attack is not gonna be too important, so don't have to worry about it. The S2 is gonna be a whole bunch of attacks, but pretty much number 1, reduce the enemy's action gauge by 20% with a 100% chance, so you're gonna be able to get a much better tempo if you're gonna be playing her in RTA. And the second line with an additional 150% damage multiplier. So if you take a look into the actual damage scaling, the base attack is pretty much gonna be 90%. So if you can proc this additional 150%, that is gonna be essentially more than triple of your original damage. On top of this, you are able to increase the ally with the highest attack, so basically your secondary DPS, by 30% of the action gauge if the barrier is broken, which is pretty much always going to happen with Wedding Epindel. So this part is not going to be having any issue whatsoever. And on top of that, you are able to get yourself the extra turn if you are going to be able to cast your S2 with ignition and max stacks. If you cannot cast ignition and max, then you'll just jump straight into S3. But other than that, you can also gain attack up for 2 turns, which can then change very nicely into your S2 into S3 combo. So for majority of the times, if your Wedding Epindel can get the additional 5 stacks, either by using her with a sun attribute ally or simply from any other ally getting critical hits, you should be able to get yourself 3 stacks or rather 5 stacks very consistently, because her own turn should give her at least 2 stacks. So if she's going to be the very last unit on your team and you have 3 other units, even if they are not going to be considered as sun attribute allies, if all 3 of them crit, you can still get yourself this additional turn from S2 into S3, right? And the last thing for the S3 is going to be a very typical caster AoE with a 66.25% multiplier, which is very comparable to Dana as well as Luna, getting herself a speed up for 2 turns, which means after you cast S2 into S3, she can actually change this S3 back into a basic very quickly, just to deal a little bit more additional damage. On top of that, you can reduce the action gauge of the target with barrier by 20%, on top of increasing damage dealt by 15% per enemy's barriers up to 3 barriers. So if you have 3 different enemy with barriers, that's going to be the 45% additional hit. So on full AoE, that's going to be essentially a 100% AoE nuke against the entire enemy target. So ideally for Wedding Epindel, you actually want to try to keep the enemy's barriers up, at least on the tanks, and then use your S2 on the enemy DPS for the highest amount of damage. And then from this particular instance, you're pretty much going to be able to stall the enemy's tempo by a much greater frequency from there. So that is pretty much how her overall kit is going to be working. And then going to the journey for Wedding Epindel, and basically how are you going to be building your Wedding Epindel for both the journey as well as your gears. Typically, I've only did 2 different runs. I think she has quite a little bit of a potential with regards to whether or not you want to use her signature arcana, because if you take a look into the potential for the signature arcana, that's gonna be from the brand new one. You get this bonus caster buff called Max Crimson. So you give this token buff for 2 turns if you hit an attack that targets all. So because this is casters only, you can actually give this to other casters like Dana, Muriel, Rosaria, or Luna, as long as they have an AoE S tree, which is gonna be available for every single caster in the game. And then on top of that, you have an additional 10% damage dealt increase, as well as 10% damage taken dealt receive decrease by that. So this is going to be a combined total of 25% additional damage, which is going to be a substantial damage increase from your overall multipliers. But the problem with this particular arcana for Wedding Epindel is that you can only trigger this if you cast S3 and not S2. And generally speaking, if you want to do the highest possible amount of damage with Wedding Epindel, you actually want to cast your S2 first, followed by the S3, which means that the effect of token can only be applied to your next basic, which is gonna be on your 3rd turn. So that being established, I feel that so far in my experiences in RTA, I don't really like running her with the signature arcana, and rather just go for the traditional typical caster route, which you are gonna be getting over here. So we are gonna be definitely going for a crit rate up, which is going to be, then you can just take a look from my arcana right here. Then with the crit rate up, this is going to be the typical speed buff, and then this is going to be unyielding destruction for your classic crit damage and HP. This is going to be for 80% crit rate, and then this is going to be your 6+6 attack as well as crit rate over here. If you want to give her a little bit more crit damage from Muriel's arcana, you can consider that as well by either swapping out your Tavria or your Barney Frey. So your Muriel plus Dana, this is pretty much gonna be a constant. You could also potentially consider swapping out the Speed Arcana, but I found myself that if my Wedding Epindel is way too slow, she's actually not gonna be able to take the action, or rather very difficult to actually get her to cast off the S2 and S3. So I do prefer myself getting a little bit more of the additional speed. So if you do have the max limit break, which is gonna be this deck right here, the Muriel at max limit break 5 will give you quite a decent amount of stacks, lesser potential points compared to Barney Frey, but the additional up to 30% crit damage can be very strong, especially for your Wedding Epindel, because you can cast S2 into S3. That is already going to be a 20% crit damage increase, which is gonna be actually a little bit higher compared to your Barney Frey, because Barney Frey only gives you a 12% crit damage, but you do get a little bit more HP. So in terms of absolute raw damage, I would say that Muriel is gonna give you a little bit more, but you are gonna trade off with having a lower potential points, since Barney Frey does give you quite a bit over there. Aside from the actual deck itself with the unique, there is not a lot of room when it comes to flexibility on how are you going to be building Wedding Epindel in the journey, because for most casters, their deck is very standardized, because every single caster, especially in PvP, they need to run this additional deck because it gives you 30% crit rate. So if you want to run Wedding Epindel, this is pretty much non-negotiable, so that you can get yourself a pretty much guaranteed 100% crit rate, which means you can either stack on additional crit damage for even more burst, or you can use a build something that I've been using myself, which is going to be the 4-piece HP into 2-piece barrier set. So for the build on Wedding Epindel right here, I would say after trying quite a lot of them, I would say I have more than 20 different matches with Wedding Epindel, I find myself leaning more towards this HP set so that I can tank the damage, since generally speaking, Wedding Epindel is not going to be able to outspeed the enemy units, especially even with the +8 speed at 174. Meaning if you are going to be getting one shot despite having a 4-piece crit damage, no amount of damage is going to be helping you out in the total damage output if your Wedding Epindel is just gonna die, right? So I actually prefer running this 4-piece HP just to give me a little bit of bulk. And on top of that, what I noticed is if you actually survive with Wedding Epindel against the enemy carries, you are actually able to still do a absolutely significant amount of damage on the enemy team. So I didn't really care that much about the damage portion anyways, as long as my Wedding Epindel can survive, giving me the attack buff, giving me the action value advance, then her utility would have been fulfilled, right? So this, personally speaking, I'm gonna be running with something like this on 69% crit rate, 93% crit damage, 174 speed, around 46k HP. I would say that this particular run is not that good. I would have actually tried to stack on a little bit more vitality here by going for a vitality parent. So maybe your ideal benchmark should be 1250, 6 to 700 HP, and then this defense is okay, and then these two is not gonna be that important aside from the PP farming, right? So that is gonna be my suggestion for Wedding Epindel's build. So at that point, if you are probably wondering, should you be putting for Wedding Epindel both the units as well as the Arcana, I would say for the units in PvP, she can definitely see quite a lot of play, especially if you're going to be going up against a full tank down player, because the damage is going to be able to do against tank down is absolutely absurd if you can combine them with other units, like for example Tyria or Bunny Charlotte, to guarantee yourself the 5 steps of ignition, proccing your S2 into S3. I wouldn't say that Wedding Epindel is going to be a definitive tier 0 DPS for now, because there are a lot of different RNG variables that could happen in an RTA match that could prevent your Wedding Epindel from getting the highest amount of utility. For example, if you're going to be up against a Carmen, if you're going to be up against Belle, any silence, any outspeeds, and if the enemy DPS just one-shots a Wedding Epindel, she actually doesn't do a lot, and she's pretty much going to be dead weight for the most part, as compared to if you were to draft a little bit more standard, like for example, more defenders, more supports, or rather your Wedding Ashura, right, your Eliza, or just having a more stable DPS instead of nuking Wedding Epindel, that could be a little bit more consistent. But if you are going to be going for highest possible amount of damage against people with shield, or rather barriers, with especially units like Wedding Carmen, Heidi, Emily, and Hilda, then she's pretty much gonna be seeing quite a lot of play within RTA, right? So if you're gonna be going for that route, I would say that her additional dupes are definitely gonna be worth it, because I personally feel that at Limit Break 0, 60% chance is just going to be a little bit too low, and you can only really start chaining this value up from Limit Break 3, because this is where your 60% goes to 80%, and then at 4 it's going to be giving you a 100% chance. If you want to have the highest possible consistency, I would recommend getting the 3 different dupes so that you can trigger the S2 into S3 very nicely, especially if you have a Sun attribute ally, right? So aside from that, for the Arcana itself, I am actually not really gonna recommend players pulling for this Arcana, because I really feel that this particular effect is very niche, at least for Wedding Epindel herself. Maybe if you want to give this to another unit like your Luna or Muriel's, and you can share them with the different casters just for the additional 25% damage, I think that's gonna be okay. But the unfortunate thing is, because this token buff, right, you only gain this token buff after attacking and target that targets all. So this buff is only applied after the original target has been attacked by your S3, meaning I think based on this wording here, I mean, I'm not sure if the wording is going to be accurate, but I think your original S3 does not actually get this buff, since it does say after attacking, so they can grant yourself token, right? If you apply this token buff before the attack lands, so if you actually cast S3 and the attack actually lands, then I would say that's gonna be not too shabby for a 25% damage increase, and it gives you a little bit more of a durability as well after you let go of S3 for any of your casters. But I would say that this particular caster cone, it is number one, very niche, just like Wedding Carmen. If you want to, you can just go ahead with the borrow feature from your friends, so that you do not have to spend your pools on this whatsoever. You could just pull for 1 copy for a collection purpose, but if you already have yourself like a good amount of friends, you can simply go into your journey with a brand new friends borrow feature. I'm just gonna do this as a demonstration. Come over to this particular portion over here, and you can just go through landing, and they can pretty much get yourself a couple of friends with a max Limit Break Wedding Epindel's Arcana over there. So I wouldn't recommend free to play and light spenders to actually get this Arcana whatsoever. It is not going to be that universal. Alright, so with that being established, I kind of want to just show a little bit of matches that I actually recorded with my experiences running Wedding Epindel. You will notice that for majority of my matches with Wedding Epindel, I always try to pair her up with another Sun attribute ally, so I can guarantee myself the S2 and the S3. And one of my favorite units to pair Wedding Epindel with is pretty much gonna be my tank Tyria. So I also gave her the 4-piece HP to make her as bulky as possible. If I cannot run tank Tyria, then I'm pretty much gonna be going for the Bunny Charlotte. So for this particular match, it's gonna be a pretty common lineup, I would say, against an enemy Emily as well as a Heidi. So this two combination is a very common matchup, especially if you're going to be going up against a tank down player. Whereas for yourself, or rather for myself, I don't have a single defender, because we are just pretty much going to deal as much damage as humanly possible. So for this particular instance, because I know I am going to be silenced by the bell, I'm just gonna let my Watch Ashra do a little bit more damage on the Roberta, because as long as Roberta dies, everything's gonna be okay. So for this particular match, he is actually gonna cast his Bell's S3, I believe, on my Rosaria. Because if she doesn't silence my Rosaria, it is going to deal way too much S2 damage against the Roberta, which is just going to die. So this is going to proc. Actually lands the, or rather fails to land the silence, which is very unfortunate. So this allows my Roberta to just activate, or rather Rosaria, pops open the S2, and Roberta is going to be at a very low amount of health. I am not going to activate my Tyria's S3, go for the S2 first to deal toughness bar damage. On top of that, you can also save up your Nova Burst on Tyria's next turn so that you can cast your S3 into S1 for the highest possible amount of damage, right? So as long as I deal enough damage, unfortunately, the Roberta actually survived with 83 HP, or around 87, which is really, really unfortunate, but I am running tank Tyria, so it is kind of expected. So at this point, he's just going to be going all in for my Wedding Epindel, hoping to kill her, and fortunately for me, this is like one of the reasons why I personally run Wedding Epindel on the full tank set, because you can see, no matter how hard he's going to be trying to go for my HP, Roberta plus Haiti into Emily is unfortunately not quite enough damage to actually land the kill on my Wedding Epindel, because I am going to be giving Wedding Epindel her full tank set in this particular RTA. So when Emily is going to pop open the S2 into S3, it doesn't really matter because there's no way my Wedding Epindel actually dies. So Emily even lands the crit on top of my Wedding Epindel, and as you see, she is pretty healthy with 500 HP remaining. So at this point over here, I'm just going to instantly pop open my S2. The only potential chance I might actually lose this is that we do not land the S2 on Roberta, which means that we are pretty much going to be getting in a bit of a problem, which is exactly what happens over here as Haiti blocks for Roberta. But because Wedding Epindel, you are able to get yourself the extra turn as long as you have ignition. This is still fine. So once I got the extra turn, I can then pop open my S2 and it will still break Roberta. But because of the evasion, or rather the accuracy debuff, if she misses this, then that's pretty much going to be game over for me. I believe luckily I actually did not miss, so this is going to come in with attack into crit rate buff. Very, very nice hit here for 7.4k, and then that is going to be breaking the enemy Roberta, which at this point I can then activate my Welch Ashira's S3, pulling up both my Rosaria as well as Tyria. So the Roberta is never going to recover. So no matter what this bell does, it doesn't matter because my Wedding Epindel already fulfilled a job, right? So she's going to come here. Alright, does not get a kill, unfortunately. So at this point, my Tyria actually outsped my Rosaria, which is because of the speed buff from the S2 previously. So it is what it is. Then we are going to come in with the S3 Soul Burst, or rather Nova Burst. Then this is going to be a big AoE. Pops open the additional basic onto the enemy Haiti, and then that is gonna immediately kill that. This part was a little bit scary because I actually landed the kill onto Belle. If this kill actually landed onto Roberta, the Belle potentially could have dealt like a single crit on Rosaria, and I might have lost, but even that, I don't think the Belle could have one-shot the Rosaria anyways. So at this point, it is pretty much gonna be a very, very clean sweep against the enemy Haiti as well as Emily lineup, using Wedding Epindel into a tank Tyria. Right? So the rest of the battle, it is pretty much going to be very, very straightforward. So this is going to be another showcase where I'm going to be running my tank Tyria into Wedding Epindel again against 3 different defenders into 1 bunny Charlotte. So you can kind of just see how much damage we're going to be able to do. Wedding, or rather Welch Ashira, pops open the S3 to pull up my team. And at this point, my Belle is going to go in for the silence against the enemy Carmen, because if she lands a stun, then that's going to be really, really annoying. So this is going to land ourselves the silence on her, so she's not going to be casting a taunt. She can just do a basic attack. And then from this point on, my Tyria, because we can't cast our S3, we are just going to be going for S2 for the additional speed buff as well as toughness bar damage against the enemy Haiti. Right? Okay, actually I just went for the, okay, doesn't really matter because they blocked anyways, so not really important because we are just going to be building ourselves speed buff to get ourselves the additional turn in the next cycle, right? So from this point, Emily is gonna be casting the S2 into the S3 for the additional defense buff as well as AoE damage for me. But from this particular point, you can see that particular shield that Emily actually casted on Bunny Charlotte, it actually allowed my Wedding Epindel to do even more damage, because now this DPS has a shield, which means my S2 gets the additional 150% damage multiplier. So from this particular hit, when I land this onto the Bunny Charlotte, it will do absolutely insane damage anyways. Easily popping open the shield, casting ourselves the action gauge down, as well as giving us a little bit more of the additional action value. So from here, my S3 is just gonna pop open. Very, very nice. And then this is just going to be dealing a good amount of AoE for a very nice 6.9k. And at this point over here, he doesn't really have the tools to actually kill me anymore, because even if this Bunny Charlotte kills my Belle, which he absolutely is going to be going for, the Bunny Charlotte actually cannot heal from this. So after my Belle dies, she actually already did a job by landing the silence on the Carmen to prevent the enemy Carmen from taunting any of my units. And then from this point onwards, my Tyria is gonna deal an absolutely insane amount of damage against the enemy Hades. So from this point, his best bet is to cast the Hades ultimate, landing the effect rest or the accuracy down on my Tyria. So if my Tyria does not land a good hit here, I might potentially lose this. So we're just going to instantly cast our Nova Burst into S3. Very, very nicely landing our crit against 3 targets, giving us the burst for our skill as well. And then from this point, we're just going to instantly get rid of the Hades because there's going to be having additional stacks. Very, very nice. And then at this point, you can see that because my Wedding Epindel gets the additional speed buff from S3, there was no way the Bunny Charlotte could actually outspeed me because she does not have a speed buff. So from this point, I'm just gonna all in on the Bunny Charlotte, and then no matter what they try to do, there's actually no way for these 2 defenders to actually kill my Wedding Epindel now because they have no damage. Right, so they can do what they want, right? At this point, you're just going to be going for the Tyria, but my Wedding Epindel is pretty much going to be coming in. So the only way that the enemy actually wins this is to pray for the 20% preemptive guard. But I already have my Guardian skill, so I didn't even need to cast this, and the Carmen, or rather the Charlotte just died, so there was pretty much no way for him to actually recover from this. And at this point, the game is pretty much going to be over because my Welt's Ashura is going to start scaling up, and then my Tyria is going to be dealing an absolutely insane amount of damage. And that is pretty much going to be game over. The Emily will just slowly die out. So not really too important. I'm just going to skip through. And he just surrendered right there, right? So there's going to be another Bunny, or rather Wedding Epindel showcase. I'll show you guys one more before talking a little bit more about her counters. Alright, so this is once again going to be another Tyria into Wedding Epindel showcase. I really use this team very, very frequently against a very wide amount of different players. So for this time, we are going to be up against a Wedding Carmen matchup against our Emily into Tyria into Wedding Epindel. So the Lily, right, actually a very, very unique user to actually use Lily. That's going to be very cool. Sayri actually gets the first turn, but unfortunately, she's not quite fast enough to actually pull up the Lily before my entire team, which is going to be a little bit unfortunate because my Welt's Ashura is going to be very fast, or rather his Lily is not going to be fast enough. So now from this, I'm going to instantly pop over my Welt's Ashura's S3, which then pulls up my Emily. So now my Emily is going to be able to pop open our barrier. You do want to give your barrier to Tyria because Wedding Epindel can give herself an attack buff after casting her S2. So for the highest possible amount of damage, you pretty much want to always give your attack buff to Tyria. So this is going to come in. And then we're just going to instantly activate our S3 for a little bit more chip damage as well as the defense up. So on this point, the Lily is just going to go in for the AoE, but she's pretty much not going to be dealing anywhere near enough damage anyways. And you can see we ignore the Wedding Carmen. Even if she gives my Lily the shield, that is actually exactly what I want because I want Lily to have a shield so that my Wedding Epindel can do additional damage. So she goes in for the S3, quite a big jump for 11k, as well as landing the attack debuff, but not quite enough to kill my Wedding Epindel, which is why once again I'm going for the HP set. So from this point, I can actually just go for my Nova Burst, and then I will instantly get us the extra turn. And then this is gonna pretty much land on the enemy Hades. And then we are just going to be dealing absolutely insane amount of damage using our Tyria. She is pretty much going to be a Hades Buster, even with HP set. So no issues there whatsoever. And then from this point on, my Wedding Epindel is going to be dealing an obscene amount of damage against Lily because she does have a barrier, which is why she's going to be working very, very well against the enemy Carmen. And then from here, even if the Carmen has an action very advanced, I'm just going to instantly pop this open. I should have given my Soul Burst with my S2, but it is what it is because we didn't have enough. So then this gives us our additional AoE for 6.4k HP. Sari does outspeed me over here, so even if he does kill my Wedding Epindel, my rest of the team is pretty much going to be dealing so much damage that there is not a lot of way for him to come back from this point. So Carmen is just gonna, I believe he will try to all-in my Epindel. Okay, actually does not go for the all-in, so he's going to be playing a little bit safe, healing the Lily back up. So from this particular point, once I get rid of the Sarah, it is pretty much going to be donezo's for him, which is going to come very, very soon. So from this point, Welt's Ashura pops open the Sarah. And then the rest of our damage, we are just going to pretty much all in on the Wedding Carmen. At this point, you do not want to activate any more additional hits on the DPS because your Wedding Epindel already lag off its burst, right? So from here on out, we're just going to continuously aim the Carmen. So even if the Lily were to kill my Wedding Epindel at this point, because my Welt's Ashura has already scaled up, there's pretty much no way for the Lily to actually kill my Tyria, Emily, as well as Welt's Ashura, and the match is pretty much going to be over from here. So at this point, we're just going to be spamming basic. Welt's Ashura is going to come in and do a lot of follow-up attacks, and that is pretty much going to be donezo, and the opponent just forfeits right there for another Wedding Epindel showcase. Okay, so with our PvP established, I'm just gonna show one couple of last clips to how do you deal against Wedding Epindel from a couple of our matchups that I've recorded previously. So one of those ways is pretty much gonna be a very traditional, and that is going to be using Bell, because Bell's silence will pretty much completely render Wedding Epindel useless. And because for this particular player, he is gonna be going for the double caster right here, so he did not ban my Roberta. So because he did not ban my Roberta, at this particular point, even if he was to deal as much damage as possible, we are pretty much going to be able to ensure our Roberta's hit, since our Emily is going to be the only one before our Roberta, meaning that Luna into Wedding Epindel have no consistent way of actually dealing enough damage against Roberta. So from this point, he's just going to activate this S3 because he wants my Roberta to come in first, as well as applying a defense buff for his entire team, which is gonna be okay. So my Roberta comes up for a very big amount of damage, and at this point, I honestly should have just went all in against the Wedding Epindel, but I was thinking to myself, okay, maybe you know what, let me just kill this Emily. So I actually just went back in for the Emily, just to get rid of the toughness bar in case Bell's silence does not land, because if Bell's silence gets 20%, then that would be really bad. So now I cast my S3 against the Luna, so if I remove all of the buffs right here, then that Luna is going to be completely useless, right? So I did not remove the buffs, unfortunately, but at least I landed the silence, so that was honestly not too shabby. So at this point on, I'm just going to be dealing as much damage as possible against the Luna, so that when my Roberta comes in with the counter, that Luna is pretty much going to get one shot, right? So this is going to come in, and Luna has no choice but to cast her basic attack, so there is no way she can actually dodge this. So the moment she lands this basic, my Roberta with the attack buff following the S3 is definitely going to one-shot this Luna, and that is going to be done. So from this point onwards, Wedding Epindel actually does not have enough stacks, so she actually cannot deal any damage to us whatsoever. So the most she can do right now is just cast herself at S3, but unfortunately, it is not going to be quite enough damage against my team. And then from this point on, it is going to be very straightforward. Cast all of my skills. I actually managed to kill this Emily right here with my Roberta, which is honestly very nice. So the moment I cast S2, my Roberta is just going to come in for the basic. And the moment Emily dies, that is pretty much going to be game over. So this is going to pop. And then my Bell gets the additional turn. So even if Sarah kills my Bell here, I can still deal way more than sufficient damage to go us through, because I still have my Hades. So from this point, I'm just gonna bum, and the moment the Wedding Epindel dies here, so I'm gonna be going for the S3 just to pull up my Hades. And then my Roberta is just gonna be able to cast our S1 burst, which should deal a insane amount of damage. Okay, and that's pretty much it to basically counter against Wedding Epindel. Now, another very nice counter against Wedding Epindel is definitely going to be running our traditional Faye, because Faye has her built-in 50% evasion. So as long as you're able to get yourself the evasion against Wedding Epindel's AoE, there's actually no consistent way for her to not hit Faye. So as long as you're going to be able to land enough counters, you can pretty much land yourself a W against Wedding Epindel. The problem with this matchup is it's extremely relying on the Faye 50-50 RNG. You can see over here, even after I were to let go of my hits, right, she's gonna be letting go of our Tyria into Wedding Epindel. If we do not land our damage against the Faye, then that is gonna be very problematic for us. So from this point, Wedding Epindel goes for the S2 against my Carmen, or rather Claire, which is gonna be dealing an absolutely insane amount of damage. So she is actually kind of forced to land her basic and not cast her S3, because my defenders can pretty much, or rather my Faye can pretty much just get the additional hit, right? If she wanted to play safe, she could go for basic, but my Hades and Emily could actually block, which means my Claire is going to be able to get a turn. So I was praying to God that I land a block. Unfortunately, I did not land a block, which was really rough. But at this point, it is still going to be a little bit winnable for me, just to see how this battle is going to play out, even though we're not going to be looking in a very favorable position. My Faye is pretty much just going to go crazy and all in all of them, right? So on this point, I need to get rid of the Bell, because if the Belle survives, she's gonna keep getting too much action very advanced, which is gonna be really, really bad, right? So from this point, he actually goes for the S2, because I think he knows that the Belle is gonna die, so he doesn't really care about the Belle anymore. Luckily for me, or rather not luckily for me, my Fae actually did not land a counter, which was really, really unlucky. The Tyria here actually does not go for the S3 because he cannot risk Tyria landing the, or rather giving my Fae the additional counter, because if my Fae lands a counter, he actually might should have just died to my team. So from this point on, I'm just gonna first kill the Belle. Even if she evades, it's gonna be fine. And then my Fae is just gonna slowly start dealing as much damage as possible against the either Wedding Epindel or the Tyria, because both Wedding Epindel and Tyria, the problem with them is this, they're full AoE, right? So at this point, he kind of just have to just go for it. So he went for the AoE, and luckily for us, my Fae actually does land the Protect. So that is going to land a hit. But unfortunately, my Fae was blinded. So we actually did not land a crit against the Wedding Epindel, which was very, very, very unlucky for us. So this is going to just come in. And I'm just going to do as much damage as possible against Wedding Epindel. This gives us a break. And then we are just going to bop. Alright, very, very nice. And then from this point on, if the Tyria was to ever cast her S3, the exact same gamble against my Fae is going to happen again. So he actually does not cast S3 and lands herself the double crit against me, which was really, really unfortunate. But luckily for me, even though it was very unlucky that my Fae didn't counter anything, the double tank down for my Emily as well as Haiti, I think we were able to essentially deal so much damage that the Tyria actually did not manage to kill us. So from here, my Haiti is going to be able to land her S3, which can then hopefully land the accuracy down debuff. Okay, a huge crit and the accuracy down debuff. So from this point on, if she's gonna be able to cast her S3, it is pretty much gonna be able to guarantee my kill. Okay, for this particular instance, I don't remember why he didn't cast his S3, but he didn't cast his S3. Because if he casts his S3 and he then go in the extra turn on my Haiti, I think my Haiti might have actually died. So I guess the thought process is to essentially rely on Welt's Asha's basic to deal as much damage against my Emily, which was honestly extremely, extremely strange. I think that could have been way better because I'm not sure why the Tyria did not cast ultimate. But my bottom line is, if my Fae just now landed enough counter, because unfortunately he really just did not activate a single counter except for the one counter, and that counter had the evasion down, this battle would have been very, very easy against a Wedding Epindel Tyria team. So using Fae here is definitely going to be a very nice fight, right? So from this point, it is pretty much just going to be giving us the additional damage. Not quite enough to land a kill against the enemy Tyria. So at this point on, after the Tyria is going to cast this S3. Alright. Unfortunately, the team is just going to be a little bit too low. I still have no idea why the Tyria did not activate the S3. Like, it is just so strange to me, but it is what it is. So that's going to be one of those ways where you can deal with Wedding Epindel. Alright, this is going to be our last video for this day, and that is going to be how you use Wedding Epindel to deal against the enemy, or rather using my own tank Tyria to deal against the enemy Wedding Epindel, right? So from this point, I actually use my save rate to pull up my Emily, just so that my Emily can be guaranteed to proc open a shield for my team. Luckily for me, his heal rate actually did not block, which is quite good. So now my Emily is gonna definitely apply our shield onto my Tyria. And then we are just going to activate our defense up from this particular point. And then the rest of the damage is pretty much just going to come all in from our Tyria's S3 into S1. And then my Fae is going to go absolutely crazy because we do have ourselves the additional AoE from both Wedding Epindel as well as Hilde. So from this point, he doesn't really have a choice but to try and take down my Tyria. But like I said, my Tyria is going to be a tank build Tyria. So it is going to be taking quite a considerable amount of damage before they can actually take roll down. So the Clarissa is going to come in with a big hit. Even if Clarissa lands the AV advance delay, it doesn't really matter because no one else is actually slower than my Wedding, or rather my Tyria anyways. So my Hilde, he does not go in for the S3 to prevent the potential trigger from Fae, which is fine. And then for this Wedding Epindel, he actually gets the S2 into S3. So he pops open the S2, but because I do not have myself a barrier, my Tyria actually somehow managed to survive that, which is quite crazy. So from this point, he actually goes in for the S3, and after dealing all that damage against my Tyria, where they actually killed, my Faye is gonna proc the counter, which means we are definitely guarantee ourselves this kill against Wedding Tyria or Wedding Epindel. I would say for this particular hit, I would have just went for the basic and saved my ultimate of something else, because that was definitely gonna be overkill. And at this point, our Faye into Emily is just gonna be having a lot of value because my Faye is just gonna be non-stop. Okay, this is not really a tank Tyria, but it is more so the tank Tyria absorbs so much damage that my Faye is just going to be having a lot of value for the rest of the fight. I'm just going to skip forward a little bit because this fight does drag on by quite a while. But you can see, this is just going to come down against a, well, it's Ashra and Heidi with Faye against Hilde. Alright, with Faye and Emily against them, right? And luckily for me, because we are gonna be double water element, we are able to break the enemy Hilde very quickly. So this would then mean that I will proc open my Guardian skill faster, as well as just dealing generally a little bit more damage, right? And because of the way that phase damage works, if you have 5 stacks of the defense down, or rather the stacks for the water, that is gonna allow her to ignore the target's defense, which is gonna be very nice. And because my Emily is still gonna be a little bit fast over here, I'm just gonna pop over my S1, giving us the kill onto the enemy Hilde. And then we are then gonna pop over our Garden skill, and then I can just let go of a Soul Burst onto the S1 to give myself the attack buff, so that I can get myself a guaranteed hit with 5 stacks into my ultimate, which is pretty much just going to one-shot the enemy Hilde right here. I'm just going to skip forward this, so even though they ignored my Fate the entire time, I'm just going to be dealing way too much damage, and the rest of the fight is just going to be a very straightforward victory for myself. So with that, we've pretty much come to the end of everything you need to know about Wedding Epindel. How do you build here? Should you be pulling for her? How do you play an RTA? How do you counter an RTA? Let me know what you guys think in the thoughts and comments down below, because this took a very long time to test out for myself. I'll be looking forward to the upcoming unit in starsavior. Generally speaking, I feel that she's gonna be a pretty alright 7 out of 10 units so far. In PvP, I would say that her use case is definitely gonna be needing a little bit more experimentation, because there are a lot of variables that can judge her performance. So let me know how you guys think about Wedding Epindel with starsavior. Word of the day is gonna be get married, right? Join Discord, use code POKE, all the best. I got boost. You guys next time. Take care.